Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Outside the Panels. I am your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and joining me for the first Outside the Panels of 2019. Yes, it's been that long. Who thought creators took Christmas off? Who knows, right? We have the creators of Spencer and Locke. Hot on the heels of their great success last year, we have writer co-creator David Pepose. David, how's it going?
Going great. Thanks for having us.
I'm great. Thank you. You're more than welcome. And joining David and I is artist and co-creator Jorge Santiago Jr. George, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Very well. Very excited. I really enjoyed the first run. So it was a real pleasure to get the second look of the book, and we can go from there. Yeah. That's all good.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. Okay, so we'll start right at the top and we'll go down. Guys, how did you both break into comic books?
This was it. For me, well, it's funny. Everybody talks about overnight successes, and they're really like 10 years. And that was definitely the case for me. I actually got my start in the industry as an editorial intern at DC in the summer of 2008. So I was working on Final Crisis, Batman R.I.P., Green Lantern Secret Origins.
So basically, if I go back and check my comic, your name's going to be in there. Is that what you said?
Yeah. I wish they credited the interns, but they, I did a lot of balloon placement. I did a lot of color notes, and the problem is it was right when the recession hit. So there were no jobs. There was nothing, no opportunities at DC, and so I wound up at the very last second getting roped into a reviewer position at Newsarama. And I did that for years until, there was just a period of time around 2014 where I wasn't really clicking with a lot of the books I was reading. And I kind of had this wild thought in my head about maybe what if I put my money where my mouth was, and if I didn't like the books, why don't I make one of my own? And I wrote that first script for Spencer and Locke in less than a week. And then it was just kind of a dare. It was kind of like, well, what would it feel like if we had an artist involved? And what would it feel like if we pitched this around? And oh my God, somebody just wanted the book. I guess I have to write the whole thing now. So that's kind of my origin story.
Cool. And George, how about yourself?
For me, so I fell in love with comics again when I was 16. That was my I grew up reading comics as a kid, but because I love the cartoons and stuff. But at 16, a friend of mine in high school, she introduced me to manga, and that was the first time that I felt like a call to make comics, especially because when I first got that first book, I was reading it and I didn't know where the stuff came from. And I remember that the night, that day when she goes, "Oh, do you want to borrow the book?" And I said, "No, I'm good." And then I ended up going home over the weekend. And back then, Google was not really a thing. So I had no idea where to get these things from. And so I was like, oh, wait, I used to draw all the time. I'll just draw my own books. And that was when, I was 16 then. I'm almost 33 now. And so I've just been drawing comics, and Spencer and Locke is my first professionally published work, but I started self-publishing at 19, printing out my own books, paying for them out of pocket and stuff. So I've been drawing mostly bad comics for a long time. They've only started being good. Maybe this year will be the first one that I'm yes, this is the one that I'm super proud of, and that I can look forward. I'll be hold it up and be yes, this is good. But I don't think that's the case. I always end up looking at my work and being oh man.
Self-deprecation is a British thing. Don't worry about it. I've got you covered for that. Don't worry.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say I don't mean to be self-deprecating. I always work my hardest, but I'm always I'm always trying to like I'm trying to be the artist that I can be like a year from now. And so it's just like it's always constant having to try to evolve.
All right. Okay. I see. Okay. So a couple of things on that, I guess. David, I totally feel your pain. Writing for reviews for Comic Crusaders, there are weeks sometimes I look at my review pile and I think, really, this book, really? Luckily, I don't have that problem with Spencer and Locke. George, enjoy the moment, man. You're at rocks on the books that I've seen. You know, I read the whole first season of Spencer and Locke. I've read the first issue with the second season. It's great. It's great art, man. Enjoy it now, and then you'll develop when you need to develop. I tell you who I talked about recently. Adam Kubert, you know, of the Kubert brothers. Right? Yeah. His work has dramatically changed over the last 5 years, and there's no way when he was, you know, subbing for his brother on X-Men all those years ago, he was thinking, oh, you know, I'm going to do, you know, just enjoy it now because, you know, your work really does rock. I really enjoy it. So, yeah, keep celebrating.
Thank you.
How did you two meet?
So we met, you know, it's a funny story. When we were putting this book together, you know, I stole a page off of Justin Jordan's playbook. You know, when I read the Strange Talent of Luther Strode, I thought, wow, this art is incredible. It's amazing. And I think that was, out of a lot of smart things Justin did in that book, connecting with Trad Moore was the smartest thing he did. And I thought, well, you know, I want to team up with an artist who's a superstar in the making. And so I looked through a lot of the art schools. I looked through their portfolios, you know, places like SCAD, SVA, RISD, the Kubert School. And George's portfolio immediately stood out at me. A lot of his work on Rare Drops and Curse of the Eel, his self-published works, really stood out at me, both in terms of the fluidity of how he portrayed action, but also just the emotional side of things. And I thought, okay, like I like, those are the two things that I really like to write, is a lot of action and a lot of like moments that'll make you cry. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so, you know, I reached out to him and I said, hey, I've got this idea. It's what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? And you know, at the time, I didn't realize that I was kind of hitting a lot of the stuff that George wanted to draw at the time. And yeah, you know, just the stars aligned, and we started working those on our pitch pages. And it's the first 6 pages of issue 1. I mean, we didn't change anything from what we sent to Action Lab to what you got to read. Those pages were just that rock solid that, you know, I knew pretty quickly we had something really special on our hands.
Cool. Anything to add on that one, George? How did you feel about when David reached out?
Yeah, it was like a because like yeah, like, so I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, and like I had been doing portfolio reviews, and I wondered if anyone would ever want to work with me, like, because I was like, okay, like I wonder what my future is like as far as like comics professionalism goes. And like right as I was about to graduate, David like emailed me out of the blue. I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. And so yeah, the idea clicked with me. Like I was really into like crime noir fiction at the time, and so like I really wanted to play in that playground, and especially because I have an idea for like a crime noir story that's sort of not quite like Spencer and Locke, where it's kind of a mashup, but like I have some fun ideas, and so like working on Spencer and Locke is just yeah, it's a fun exercise, especially because like when David pitched it to me, I didn't know that it was going to be as action filled as it is. So I'm definitely like the first car chase scene I've ever drawn is in the pages of Spencer and Locke, and so it's like it's a really cool, just like to work on a comic that like that resonates with people, but also to do something that is like giving me the chance to like sort of like flex my muscles and try out things that I would never do on my own, because my comics tend to just be either depressing or weird, But with Spencer and Locke, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm drawing stuff that's like, it's challenging.
Oh, I thought you could say we could be both depressing and weird.
That's what I thought that was going.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
We can be both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Action
Why
packed,
not?
depressing, strange, weird, the whole enchilada. Boom,
Yeah.
there you
We're
go.
the
who
Reese's
you're-
peanut butter cup of comics.
There is that. Okay, so influences wise, this question pops up, and looking through the first run of the books, it's obvious. You've kind of said a couple of things already. You said Calvin and Hobbes. You said Sin City. So there is an absolute huge resonance with Calvin and Hobbes in Spencer and Locke. Other than those, who are your influences? Both for writing as well as for, I guess, the art and how the style sort of develops.
Sure. Well, for me, I mean, old school Frank Miller was kind of the starting point for Spencer and Locke for me, as opposed to Calvin and Hobbes. Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, is kind of the book that, as a kid, made me realize that real writers wrote comics. That it, and then reading Dark Knight Returns and Year One and Sin City. So, Frank Miller, his classic work had a real kind of innovative and pioneering streak to it. And, it's that sort of that Eisner training that he had.
Mm-hmm.
The way that he can kind of play around with tempo and the way he can play around with layouts and panel composition. Warren Ellis's work on Moon Knight was also really inspiring for me, as was Cameron Stewart, Brendan Fletcher, and Babs Tarr on Batgirl. Those two series, and Declan Shalvey on Moon Knight, I shouldn't leave him out. Those two series, I liked the sort of done in one kind of ethos that they would bring to each issue. I'm not a huge fan of decompression when I can avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I want to make sure that every issue kind of has enough meat to it that you don't feel like you wasted your money on me.
So, like, every issue has a start, a middle, and an end, rather than
and
always
it's got
being
its own identity.
continuation. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to write The Empire Strikes Back.
Well, it's funny though. I will say I think Spencer and Locke 2 is our Empire Strikes Back, but I'll dig into that in a little bit.
Okay. Cool.
I will say some of the other works that are really inspiring. There's Devin Grayson and Roger Robinson on Batman Gotham Knights. That's like an old school Batman book that nobody talked about, but
I like Devin Grayson. I've got a lot of respect for her. I think she's absolutely tip top. I know she got some controversy on Nightwing, but
Yeah, this was her work like right before Nightwing. It is like, I mean, that's like Desert Island reading for me. And Afterlife with Archie, Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, really that was one of the books I was reading right before I started writing this. And he actually walked into one of my signings in LA around our second issue. And I was just like, here's my book. Like, thanks for everything. So hopefully one of these, it's a small town. I hope to run into him again, give him the whole thing.
Cool. Excellent. And George, yourself?
I think so. Oh man, like influences, because like I've tried to read like as many comics as possible, but like I think my three biggest influences are probably Stuart Immonen in a lot of ways, mainly because I feel that what Stuart Immonen is a master of is knowing like what the works he's doing require. And and I've talked about this in places, but like his work on Next Wave versus his work on like Russian Olive to Red King or Moving Pictures, or his work on the New Avengers, like all of these books, they're drawn by the same person, but they have a different feeling, a different like flavor, and he knows what these stories require, and he can just he just makes these beautiful comics that like elevate the medium, like and so I think that like he was a big influence on sort of like the like my want to like sort of branch out into different genres, which we do get into in Spencer and Locke. My second influence is probably Natsume Ono, a manga artist who she's most well known for things like what's I guess the most recent thing is Akka, which is it's like ACCA. It's this like sort of it's this like political political story. But the comic that I read from her that really opened my eyes to like what comics could do was this book called Not Simple. It was this drama centered around this family, and like the way that she orders her panels, the way that she like there's this important scene that happens where this writer is waiting for this character to come home, and she used like 3 to 5 pages of just panels of this author waiting, and it's different panel types, and like I just most of my thesis was studying this sequence because she just knows how to use layout in order to control the pacing of a comic, and so she is probably, I think, like the greatest influence, and also just because she likes to write sad stuff, so that's the other thing that I vibe with her. And then probably my last influence, I've said Yusuke Murata a lot, the guy who draws One Punch Man, but I'm starting to think that my next biggest influence might be Katsuhiro Otomo, the guy who drew Akira.
Right.
I'm getting a lot of people who are telling me that like, oh, like this reminds me of Akira, or like, oh, these faces you draw, they look like his. And I'm starting to like, as I'm looking back at like these volumes of Akira, like there's so much meat and like depth in these pages that like, especially with Spencer and Locke 2, I really wanted to push the identity of the city a lot more. And so like a lot of the backgrounds in Spencer and Locke in volume 2 were inspired by some of the city scenes and some of the grit and such of Akira. And like yeah, I would say those are probably my 3 like most noteworthy influences.
All right. Cool. Excellent. So manga's really quite prevalent for you then? You mentioned it was your bug bite back when you were 16. It still holds that place in your heart?
Yeah, because like when I was a kid, like my mom would take me to the comic book shop, and like I had issues of like the Adam Kubert like X-Men. Like I had the issue of Wolverine where they're transporting him home after he gets his like metal leached out of him by Magneto. It's the one where we first see that he has bone claws. Like I had that issue, and I had like issues of Spider-Man, and like I love the Scarlet Spider. Like the Scarlet Spider just seems so cool. Like back in the day, he was cool. Like he was just like
Ben Reilly, the
yeah,
Spider Clone.
Yeah,
I love. Clone was never cool.
Oh no, I think like I think that I think at that time Ben Reilly was cooler than Peter Parker, because Peter Parker was like he like as soon as he like had this doubt that maybe he was the clone, he just fell to pieces. Whereas like Ben Reilly, and like he just was like, okay, well I might be a clone, but I'm gonna try to make the best of this time. Like whereas like Peter just sort of fell to pieces. Like I felt like Ben Reilly kind of stepped up to the plate, and so like that's why I remember Ben Reilly fondly. But like those comics I was reading, like they didn't I remember looking at them and checking out the art, but I don't remember like as a kid I feel like the stories were they were too complicated for me to really like vibe with. Like it was cool to look at, and like I watched the cartoons, but I think it was manga that first like these were comics where it's like, oh, okay, I can jump into this. And a lot of like the first one I started off with was Rama One Half, and that one's like a martial arts comedy, and a lot of it is not sequential. Like you can sort of pick it up at any volume and be brought up to speed very quickly. And so it made it a lot easier for me to drop into it and then like fall into that world. Whereas like even with the X-Men, like with that Wolverine comic, like I had no idea why Wolverine was like suffering so much at the beginning. And then like a character makes a comment like, oh, why did Magneto do that? I was like, oh, okay, so Magneto did this. But like I had no real context for it. But yeah, and like what I also discovered with manga was because like I think like colors are beautiful in a comic, but like being able to like see the pen, like the inks and what the inks are doing, the storytelling there, because I've never been very good at coloring. And I think that like that's one of the best things we have is we have Jason Smith like coloring Spencer and Locke. Because if I was coloring it, it'd be a mess. But like being able to like for like an Akira is a great example to look at that and sort of see like, okay, how are they planning out their panels with just ink? You know, how do you figure out these scenes, these complicated bike chases and such? Like, how do you plan these out? Like, being able to, it's the same thing with like, I didn't even know that Marvel did this, but they had the Marvel Essentials. Like those are amazing, where they just print the inks of like classic comics,
The
like
black and white stuff, yeah.
yeah, like those were like I studied those when I was in school. Like I bought the essential Spider-Man with the Stan Lee Steve Ditko run, and like I enjoyed it, but like I was like studying and like learning like, okay, like how are they doing this, and like seeing sort of the evolution like as Spider-Man became like the character that we know today. Like it was really cool to study it from that perspective. Like yeah.
Excellent. I'll tell you a quick story about Steve Ditko. My dad, when I was back in the 70s, we used to get Marvel reprints, and my dad bought me a Spider-Man reprint. It was the Spider-Man annual with the Sinister Six in it, and I kicked it off massively. I was like, "It doesn't look like Spider-Man," and I went blah blah like a proper brat, screamed about it, and then like 2 hours later, I read the damn thing. I was like, "Wow, this is great." So Steve Ditko's like he's one of my faves. So there you go. So with both volumes 1 and the start of volume 2, you have, I guess, nuances, if we were going to say such a word, with the newspaper comic strips, Calvin and Hobbes, and of course, is it Battle Bailey? Is that what they call him?
Beetle Bailey, yeah.
Beetle Bailey. I don't have Beetle Bailey over here, so not a lot of Brits may not know who he is, but mind you, saying that not that many people still know who Calvin and Hobbes is, which I think is a bit of a travesty. But
it always breaks my heart. I have to tell kids at the conventions, oh, it's that sticker of the kid who pees on things. Then they get it.
No, Calvin. All my kids in my house have gone through my Calvin and Hobbes collection. I make sure that if you don't have to read comic books, read this.
You know, I blame the education system out here. I think that just there are some kids who just, as soon as I show them the image on my phone, then they get it, and they're like, "Oh, those are the guys, Calvin and Hobbes." But yeah, usually, if they're under college age, I sometimes have to like give them a quick refresher before they know what we're talking about.
So my question is, what is it about the newspaper strips that make you think, oh well, this would translate into, for example, Calvin and Hobbes being cops?
Yeah, well, when with the first volume, it was sort of I wanted to do kind of an homage to Frank Miller, and I was thinking, what kind of I liked mashup music at the time, and so I was thinking, what if somebody did a mashup comic? And so I was thinking, what's like the weirdest thing you could put up with Frank Miller and still stick the landing with it? And the problem is a lot of the ideas that I had at first, they felt very shock value oriented, which is not. That's not a way that you can like sustain an audience. You can that's not a way that you get somebody coming back for 4 issues or more.
Totally.
But when I thought of Calvin and Hobbes, this image just popped into my head of kind of this like grinning, beat up cop in an alleyway. And there's rain pouring. He's got bandages all over. He's giving this maniacal smile, and he's holding a stuffed animal. And that just that was the image that popped into my head, and I was like, oh. I get it. Like the whole story kind of clicked in my head with that one moment where I was like, well, if he has a stuffed imaginary friend as an adult, what was his home life like as a kid? It must have been horrible. Mm-hmm. And it started really kind of feeding into a lot of the things that I thought when I read the original Calvin and Hobbes. I kind of figured Calvin's mom had a temper just based on the way that Watterson would draw her, very expressive and, sort of ready for this primal scream at any moment. What was funny was when I started pitching this around, people were saying, well, I don't know. Like, I get it. Like, Calvin and Hobbes is like one of the most sacred cows in comics, and rightly so. And so I thought as a backup, well, you could just do it as the Full Fables approach with comic strips in general. because when I was a kid reading them in the newspaper, they were all on the same page.
Mhm.
So it organically kind of fed into that concept. So when we sold the first volume of Spencer and Locke, the hardest thing for me was biting my tongue to be like, if we get a sequel, we're going to throw everybody in the mix. and
I can't wait to see Luan.
yeah, and it's sort of doing Beetle Bailey made a lot of sense to me. Our character Roach Riley, I say it's if Heath Ledger's Joker had survived the events of the Deer Hunter. It's just really kind of like it. When I thought about the things that police officers face, like street level crimes, like an obvious go-to, which is what we did in our first volume. But I thought of, what about terrorism? Sort of this larger than life, almost existential kind of threat that how could two street level cops hope to stop this? Yeah. And the idea of having this sort of former military man, Beetle Bailey was kind of a slacker in the comics. He was this a slacker army private who, was constantly sleeping on the job, and his sergeant kept beating him up. And I thought, well, what if we put him through the meat grinder and, turn him into like kind of this heavily armed, super trained killer? Mm-hmm. And he wound up being my favorite character to write for our sequel, and that's coming from somebody who loves writing Locke. Locke is in third place for me for this arc.
Oh, really?
That's how much I like writing Roach.
What you say about shock value really does work, because the first time I read the first issue of Spencer Locke, I was blown away. I thought it was great. Second issue, I was like, yeah, get the gag. It's Calvin Hobbes. Mm-hmm. By halfway through the third issue, something clicked, and I actually started caring about Spencer as a character, and I wanted to see his journey. And that's what made me pick up the next issue and just sort of like follow it through to the end. So you're absolutely right about that whole shock value thing. Totally right. Because it needs to, for me, the familiarity of Calvin Hobbes made the book readable and straight away very open to read. But it didn't become a one gag pony, if that makes sense, because the characters evolved just at the right pace for the readers to get with it.
Yep. And I'm so glad you said that, because that's a lot of what we're doing in volume 2 is, the thing about monthly comics in general is, it's the illusion of change. There's a status quo, there's an inertia to it, like characters are always going to go back to sort of the status quo, even if there's like a minor alteration or a temporary alteration, they're going to come back. And we didn't want to do that with this book. And that's why, like, with our second volume, we're people kept asking us, well, how could somebody who's so obviously damaged become a cop, even pass their psych exam? And that's what we're delving into with volume 2 is, he's suspended. Locke is suspended as soon as we open volume 2, because you don't go through a $1 million property damage car chase or leave a warehouse full of dead henchmen without somebody, calling you up. I mean, there are to this kind of cowboy behavior, and and on top of that, Locke, he, without spoiling too much, he's confronted a lot of his childhood foes in our first volume and dealt with them about as decisively as he can, and he still feels terrible. He still feels the pain of his scars. If anything, he's more lost than ever. He doesn't know where to go from here. And, there's a lot of sort of personal and professional, and I might even say spiritual consequences for him after the first arc. And he's already on the ropes when Roach comes to town.
You can see that there are changes abound, because Spencer's attitude changes. Mm-hmm. I'm not, no spoilers, but it changes. And you can see how that relationship can kind of sway and also affect. Is the relationship a result of Locke feeling so down, or is it the other way around? Who's the butterfly? Who's the dream? That's kind of.
Ooh. I mean, I always think of them as having kind of a symbiotic relationship, but Spencer is a figment of Locke's imagination, and as sort of a representation of Locke's conscious in so many ways. The inner turmoil in Locke's head is very different than what he's used to. I think all these years that he and Spencer have come together, it's sort of been this idea of, well, if I ever see these people again, maybe I'll have my catharsis. For him, he found them, and we said this at the end of our first arc. He killed someone who was really kind of instrumental to his development, and he didn't feel anything. And so now he's kind of thinking to himself, wow, like where do I go from here? That resolution did not have the impact I thought it would. And so that inner turmoil is going to manifest itself in Spencer in some very interesting ways.
Cool. So quick question about the art. George, the flashback sequences are expertly done. So great. So how did you manage to get that sort of like affectation down? Was it like, did you have to study a lot of the classic strips to kind of get the vibe and the beats down, or how did that work?
Yeah, I for all of the flashback scenes, like the ones with in Locke's past or even in Roach's past, we like right off the bat, David wanted to have those be done in a different art style, and like I think that I wanted to draw those informed by the because like I read Calvin and Hobbes a bunch as a kid, and like I have copies of they're not, it's not the complete works, but like sort of like the compilation books that like you can get it.
I've got those.
Yeah, and so like studying those, I wanted to find a way to sort of assimilate like the techniques that these artists were using, and like not outright copy them, because I think that like the problem I find with if I was to just try and do like a pitch perfect, like, one, it would look bad because like you can't measure up to Bill Watterson. Like I know I certainly can't, but like I didn't want the book to feel like it was drawn by different people in order to make these scenes feel organic, especially on pages where the flashbacks take place at the same time as the present day sequences. They needed to feel like they meshed together, and I think that especially when we get to like our second arc, I think that the flashback style, especially for the Locke scenes, like it kind of changed a bit. Whereas like I felt a little more confident in being like, okay, well, this is the decision. Like these are the decisions I'm making that echo this style, but I can take it in this direction and make it a little bit more my own. And so like those scenes were important for the comic, but also like to sort of bring up like what you were saying before about Beetle Bailey like not being available. I had a hard time finding Beetle Bailey references. Like that work is not really compiled the same way that like Calvin and Hobbes is. Like I could go to Barnes and Noble right now and get like a bunch of like Calvin and Hobbes books for like $7, but not with Beetle Bailey. And even like at comic book shops, I would go to like Dr. No's, which was like my favorite like Atlanta like comic book shop. Like there aren't collected volumes of Beetle Bailey, and I find that interesting. Like where like if people were going to find out about this comic, like where do they go to find out about it? Like it's an interesting like I don't want to start like a new discussion, but sort of like that is an important aspect of like newspaper comic strip history that is just that's like sort of vanishing, and it's like, well, where is it going? Like why is this not as collected as like Foxtrot is, for example? Or like the Far Side.
I used to do a newspaper, like a newsletter for a company that I used to work for. It's like a staff morale thing. And at the end of, on the last page where the funnies used to be, I always used to put a Calvin and Hobbes in. I used to get them from a website called Go Comics. And from there, I fell in love with Luann and her firefighter brother. And does he get the girl? And does the girl go out with the guy at the record stuff? And it's like all that sort of stuff. And I was like, so Go Comics might be a place to check. I haven't checked out for a while, so I don't know what's on there anymore. But there's a host of different books on different strips on there. So
the wild thing is
check that out.
People think of Calvin and Hobbes, but compared to a lot of other comic strips, it actually had a fairly short shelf life. It had about a 10-year shelf life, and that was including Watterson taking sabbaticals. And whereas like a Beetle Bailey or a Garfield or a Peanuts, they've been going on for decades, and that's the thing that's interesting to me is they do have some historical collections of Beetle Bailey, but it's very hard, and some of them are more of just kind of chopped up based on theme.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like because these things have been going on for so long, unless you're like a Charles Schultz, or a Jim Davis, people, they're not compiling them chronologically the way that they would Bill Watterson with Calvin and Hobbes.
I understand. So, question about how the book kind of and the story kind of germinates. Did you apply like full scripts with the humor beats, or did the beats kind of? And how does that mash with if you're using sort of the flashback scenes? So, for example, the car chase in one of the earlier issues. Do you think, oh well, there's a great Calvin Hobbes strip because he's always in that bloody cart of his, isn't he? Flying down it's either the sled or the cart going down a hill or a snowfield or whatever. So how do you do you think, oh, that would make a great extension, or how's that work?
Exactly. Well, what I did, once we sold once I started developing the series beyond that first issue, I read the entirety of Calvin Hobbes, and I took notes saying what are sort of themes that keep popping up, what's the iconography at play here. And so, yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the car chase. I said, yeah, he's always in that wagon. They're always sort of racing around. Speed and motion was a big part of that Calvin and Hobbes series, or things like Spaceman Spiff. These are things that people are going to expect if you're doing sort of a gritty parody of Calvin and Hobbes. What's a fun way for us to include them? And that sort of helped me figure out, okay, this is what each issue is going to be about. And then I can kind of do an outline and then a full script based on that. Spencer and Locke 2 was a little bit more loose. I did not write an outline for it. And as I was writing it, I was cursing myself for not doing so, because I was like, oh man, the first arc came out so easy. And this one, it's a little bit more of a high wire act, because you are meshing together not one, but two different comic strips. Yeah.
Three if you count Spencer Locke itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've got your Spencer Locke world, then you've got Calvin world, and then you've got Bailey world, and all three have got a gel.
Exactly.
There's got to be resonance between Calvin and Hobbes and Spencer and Locke, and Bailey and the bad guy in the next book. It's all got a gel to make some cohesiveness.
I see it as kind of like imagine if you're in a dark room, okay? You go into your bedroom at night, you turn off the lights by the door, and you have to stumble your way to bed. But there's all sorts of things on the floor. There are Lego pieces, there are rusty nails, there are clothes, and you have to kind of feel your way to the finish line without kind of putting a nail through your foot. That's kind of how I tend to write, is sort of feeling my way and being like, nope, that's not right. All right, go back. All right, this works. But I always try to get some sort of landmarks. I'll just listen to music and think, okay, what's kind of like a cool emotional beat that I can build towards. Mm-hmm. And that's usually sort of how I kind of light my way a little bit. For Spencer and Locke 2, I knew where the series was what the destination was immediately. And I knew the starting point. And that way I was sort of able to kind of like punch up certain moments in between. And in the end, I think not having an outline, as much of a pain in the butt as it was, it wound up helping quite a bit. It let me kind of call some audibles that I hadn't expected when we started, particularly for our third issue. I think our third issue is going to make some fans really happy with us, because we were able to include some iconography that we didn't in the first arc. That I think it clicks in a very interesting way, I think.
Excellent. Excellent. George, so when you got the scripts, were there like clip notes of check out this strip in such and such, check out this to help you find the sort of parallel between Spencer and Locke and Calvin and Bailey? I respect not Bailey so much because they had to find. So were there sort of like clip notes in there to kind of help point you in the right way?
Yeah, for like specific parts, I'm remembering the script for the chase scene in volume 1. There were direct callbacks to like, okay, like, you know, like this moment or like these moments in Calvin and Hobbes, you know, like let's try to capture this kind of feel. And what I would always try to do is like never just draw from like one strip. I would always try to like get as many examples of when they're riding down hills in their wagon, you know, like, you know, and compiling enough information to be able to create a sequence that's not just like, oh, this is a reference to Calvin and Hobbes strip number 1432. You know, I'm more it can be helpful, but it can also be kind of damning too, just like in terms of when like, oh man, because like especially like with Watterson, like his work is so like, because I did grow up with it, and like it's sometimes looking at those, it could be kind of daunting to be like, oh man, I have to measure up to this, but also it's dangerous in another way, in that like whenever you pick up a Calvin and Hobbes book and you're like, oh yeah, I'll just read this one strip, like 30 minutes pass and you're just like, oh man, I should be drawing. I've been reading this for this long. Like it's Calvin and Hobbes is still like, and I enjoy it more, I think, as an adult and as a comic creator than I did as a kid. As a kid, I loved it, but like as an adult, like there's so much there. Like, and I know it's not nostalgia. It's not just fondness. Like I can feel that like this is a brilliant work. But
technical skill, you know, like just the innovation that goes into it.
Yeah, well, and he was a master of writing too. Like it wasn't just like the skill of like putting the lines down, like, you know, because like just in the way he would draw a tree was amazing. But like the way that the stories would like, because up to that point, like when I was reading the newspaper strips, like they were all sort of like one day gags. But like Calvin and Hobbes would have like there was the part where Calvin found like a baby raccoon.
So hedgehog. It's a hedgehog.
Oh, it's a hedgehog. Okay.
He finds a hedgehog and they put it in a little box, and it ends with him saying something, I can't believe I feel so empty about something that I didn't know existed.
Yeah, and it would have these moments where like the comic would be sequential, and like, but when it did it where it mattered, and there's such like Bill Watterson is just like, his work was just so I don't know, it's like I remember loving the newspaper strips, but like his work always felt like it was from another planet, like altogether, like, and it was just yeah. And so like for the scripts and such, like David would always try to like leave it like, okay, yeah, like we're gonna call to this, but like let's try to evoke this emotion or evoke this feeling. And I always think that with those scenes, we always try to put Spencer and Locke before our reference, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Because like as much as we want people to like, oh, when you open the first page of either volume, we want you to sort of see where we're calling back to.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the comic is Spencer and Locke. It's
Definitely.
it's not the other ones. And so yeah.
Definitely, and that worked, as I said, because halfway through the first run, my perception changed to, oh my god, I really care about what's going on with Spencer and Locke. As fun as the Calvin and Hobbes homage or elements are, I want to know what's going on with Spencer and Locke. So it changed halfway through for me. Has Bill Watterson commented on your book? Has he mentioned it? Has he seen it? Did you send him a copy?
Not that I'm aware of. You know, as far as I know, you know, he tends to be fairly reclusive The idea of us ever making his radar kind of like blows my mind. Like would blow my mind. I don't consider myself. I'm not conceited enough to think that we're big enough for him to notice us. But I would hope that, if he did read the book, he saw it for what it was, which is, it's not just a parody, but it's also a love letter. The reason why we picked Bill Watterson and Frank Miller was because in my mind, they're once in a generation talents. They're pioneers, they're innovators, they're trailblazers. And the things that they were able to do within the medium, no one can match that. Especially not us. I mean, we very much believe that we're standing on the shoulders of giants for this book, and this is a token of our appreciation more than anything else. I think you'd be hard pressed to find bigger fans of Bill Watterson than us, and so if he does read it, Bill, I hope you dig the book, man, because we are huge fans.
There you go. How is it working with Action Labs?
Oh, it's been great. The thing is like, just by virtue of the high concept and seeing just our first issue, there are a lot of publishers that they wouldn't have the stomach to print it. And we did find plenty of publishers who did not. I will never forget when a top 5 publisher told us that this was the best pitch that they would never publish.
See, now you've got to name names. You can't just leave me hanging like that. Top 5.
I take that as a huge compliment.
So it wouldn't be DC or Marvel.
I won't name names, but
no, you can't, because it might affect you down the line. So please don't. They said rightly, I get it. They were like, well, if we ever wanted to do reprints of Calvin and Hobbes, we don't want to risk ticking off Bill Watterson, which is fine. It makes perfect sense. But Action Lab, to their credit, Dave Dwanch, who was the editor that pulled us out of the slush pile, immediately got the book and immediately saw the potential to it. Dave, I remember I stayed late at work one day because I was putting together last touches on the PDF that we would send out to publishers. And I sent a copy to Dave, not knowing him from a hole in the wall. He didn't know me. It was just a blind submission. And he emailed me about 20 minutes later and was like, how soon do you think you can get this book done? And that's when I was like, I remember sitting in my office. It was like 7:00 at night. I felt like a chill run down through my spine. And I was like, no, we got to actually write this book now. Damn, no, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing with Action Lab is, they're a smaller publisher. They're a scrappier publisher. And I think that means they're a little less self-conscious about these sorts of things. And it's so great because they trust the creators. They immediately, they did not say, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. They were like, tell the story that you pitched us, and we trust you to do that. They gave us all the latitude we could possibly want. And I think for a story like ours, which is already kind of a high wire act, that's exactly what we needed, because there are some publishers who would have, understandably said, you can't do that. Like pull it back. And there are some publishers who might have said, oh, push it harder. Either approach would have killed our book. Yeah. And so having a publisher like Action Lab who just trusted us to tell the story, it's huge. And they've been, so supportive of us. And I think, it's very easy to sort of have too many cooks in the kitchen and, kind of ruin the whole pie. And Action Lab was very much like, we trust you and your vision. Execute it the way you feel like you need to execute.
I think I love Action Lab books. I think they have. I think the push just enough, as you say, allow the creation to breathe. I think they're one of three companies that kind of do that, from my opinion. As from the outside looking in, you've got Action, you've got Black Mask Studios, and a Derby Pop, who are like really small, but they again have a lot of trust with their guys. Some of their stuff can be quite off the wall, so it's up there. How question for you both then? How hard do you think it is right now for indie books to get traction, especially small press books? When you talk about you're going up against You're going
Yeah.
you cross media icons, aren't you? With bats and soups and all them.
It's tough, and I honestly I would say it's tougher than ever. There's been a lot of consolidation with a lot of the bigger sites, and I get it. Like, people are, they're based on a click-driven revenue model, and so Batman or Superman will certainly get more clicks, or Marvel, DC, Image, they'll get more clicks than an Action Lab. Even when I would argue our high concept is inherently newsworthy, because somebody bashing together Calvin and Hobbes and Sin City, like, I think that's part of the reason why people were drawn to our first arc, was they were curious if these two idiots were going to make this stunt jump that they had written. It's tougher than ever, and you really just, I tell creators all the time, you have to be your own best advocate. No one's going to love your book the way that you love your book, and no one's going to promote your book the way that you promote your book. And, I think being able to just talk to people on a personal one-to-one level, it's a lot harder work, and it takes a lot of time than just sending an email blast out. Yeah. But I think that's the difference between, getting somebody to take that second to read your work versus, doing the reviews at Newsarama. I was blasted with emails every single day. And, that was a good experience for me, because I got to learn kind of what emails would catch my eye and which ones, just, all right, this isn't very personal. Like,
next.
and it's an ongoing process too. It's an evolution. I mean, reaction begets reaction in a way. When we were first starting out, I remember we announced at New York Comic Con in 2016, and I remember we had these convention exclusive copies of issue 1, but those are priced higher, and nobody knew who we were. We had zero traction other than our initial announcements. And I think I sold like 3 copies of that book at the con. But a year later, we had built up on that reaction, and people had hearing about us, and people started giving us a chance, because, you can say, hey, look, like, somebody at IGN really liked the book, or, see our interview over at Sci-Fi. And that people started giving us more opportunities, because they started seeing, like, okay, like, more and more people are saying, hey, this is crazy, but it works. But going back to your question, it's very hard to get traction. There's a lot of books out there. A lot of them are terrific books. So that makes it even harder. And all you can do is just sort of key in on what's the thing that makes your book special? What's your elevator pitch? And then you just have to trust in your concept and say, okay, here's our concept. This is why people would like it. We'd love to chat. And, thankfully, people seem to have responded to that approach. And, hopefully people will stick with us for volume 2, because, we're going to expand this world in a big way, before we blow some stuff up.
Cool. Blow some stuff up. Well, I can say it's definitely UCPN and Comic Crusaders, we're our own identity. We're not linked with any big click-heavy websites, or we're not owned by any of the conglomerates out there. And we love indie books. We on Outside the Panels, we've spoken to people from Geek Girl. We talked to Zach Nadler and Lonnie Thompson, or Zach Thompson, not Lonnie Nadler, about their stuff before they hit the X trail. So we absolutely love indie books. We think that the indie books deserve especially when they're done as well as Spencer and Locke, that they deserve their moment in the sun.
The thing is, I think sites like yours, I think are so important to the ecosystem, because I think you hit the nail on the head that, honestly, like, I think indie books are often some of the most interesting books. They're taking chances that a lot of other places can't. And I get,
and they don't want to, because of the cross media. Nobody wants to go too far with any of the characters. I mean, fair enough, you can black label Batman,
Right.
But even then, a naked Bruce Wayne causes problems. You're like, hold on, it's supposed to be for adults already, but still that causes problems. So it's a bonkers world.
And it's like I get the push and pull between it because look, if you're a big site, if you're a comic book resources, and if you haven't covered the latest Batman, people are going to say, well, why didn't you cover the latest Batman? That's the big book. I get it, but yeah, there's that sort of push and pull because the indies are where that's where the future creators of big two creators of tomorrow are coming from. That's where all the innovation is being made, I think, because like we said before, big two there is a rhythm. And it's a lucrative rhythm, but you kind of know there's that inertia that your characters are going to fall into. The X-Men are going to come as the X-Men.
Don't get me started with the X-Men.
Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey, and Storm, and whatever.
So would you two want to work on big two books?
I'd love to. I mean, I'm not sure if I've ever said this publicly. Before I came up with Spencer and Locke, I was particularly not feeling the DC books at the time, which had broken my heart because I was a DC Comics intern and I love DC characters. And so what I did was the New 52, it wasn't clicking with me. So I actually wrote 52 pitches. If I was in charge of the DC universe, this is how I wrote 52 pitches. And so I would love to do some stuff with Marvel or DC because I've got a lot of thoughts of just like this could be a cool thing to do with this character. I like the icons, I like the iconography because you can kind of play with it and bounce off of it. But at the same time, I'm also really digging the creator-owned scene. I love being able to sort of tell my stories my own way and not have to think about like what's the licensor going to say about it. So I think we're kind of the best of both worlds with this book.
Definitely. I think there are creators out there that are doing both. People like Cullen Bunn, for example. Pat Shan's out there doing a bit of both. George, how about yourself? Would you want to work on a big two book?
Not. I mean, like, so, like I so when I was in school, my professors told us like always have like like you never know when at a con you're going to be in an elevator with an editor from like X company, and if they were to be like, so if we gave you access to like our stuff, like what would you do? And so like I've got ideas for things that I would do, but like they're all things where like I know they would never let me do them. Like I think that I would like I have an idea for like a series of DC books, but in order to make it work, I would need to have like my own Earth because I would want to start from like I would want to start from like the very beginning of like, okay, who are these characters? I would change up their origins and change up like because in my mind I think that like and sort of like what we were talking about with like sort of the big two versus other publishers is that there's so much cachet in these characters that like it's like a big ship on an ocean. Like if there's a glacier coming up, they can't evade it quickly. Like change comes so slow, and I think that's why Frank Miller I think has such a lucrative history with these companies is because they only ever tell nowadays like second act stories. Whereas like with Frank Miller, like he always like his books were either the origin, like the first chapter, or the last chapter, which are like those are the iconic ones when it comes to a lot of these superheroes. It's the origin, like it's Batman like year one, or it's the Dark Knight Returns for like one last big hurrah. Like he has to come back out of retirement, but like in to make it in like Marvel or DC right now, it's like I feel like it's like what David was saying. You end up having to always write to the point where it's they're always going to come back. I mean, like and I mean, and like as a person who like I'm into comics because I love to draw stories about people. I love to tell stories about character change, about tragedy. Like a lot of my indie work is based around that. Like Curse of the Eel is like it was me trying to tell a Lovecraft story but around a high school full of kids that hate each other, and like delving into why these kids don't get along, and like maybe like jumping into their personalities and things like that. Like that's what I want to get into. But like, with a lot of these like like especially superhero stuff, like they can't make wholesale changes to a lot of these characters that are going to stick. Like there have been like there have been comics where I'm like, man, this run is really good and I really like where they're going with it, and then it has to revert back to zero again. It goes from like 0 to 5 and then back to 0. And like it's cool. Like I understand, like if you love Spider-Man, then like yeah, you're just gonna love him no matter what. But like for me, I think the main appeal of comics is telling a story that is that has like some punch to it. That's more, I think the finality of a story is like kind of what makes it special. Like a good example of this, I think, is like the most recent like Spider-Man. So like with Spider-Man movies, we had 3 Spider-Man movies, and then we had a reboot, and then 2 movies. And then right as like, okay, after 2 movies, they decide to reboot it again. It's like, what if you were invested in these characters? Like, it just sort of feels like how can you get invested in them anymore? Like, because I mean, in a few years, they'll just be like, okay, well, if Spider-Man 3 doesn't make enough money, we'll just reboot the whole thing. It's like they'll find a way to sort of restart it. And I find that I think that has a definite shelf life with certain people. I feel because like I've definitely gotten bored of it. Like I think people want fresh new takes on things, and I think that indie books, especially like as they're getting more and more cachet, like I think the fact that Deadly Class is now becoming a TV show, and more indie comics are becoming movies. Like I think that we're kind of in the indie comic book renaissance right now. Because like because now there's never been more eyeballs of people who want to find out what the next best thing is. Like books like, and then there's books like Saga, where it's like, the amount of people who didn't really read comics, especially like because their concept of comics was, oh, okay, it's Batman and Spider-Man. Like they read books, they read Image books, they read these Oni Press books. They're reading comics that are outside of their wheelhouse, and it's bringing them back in a big way. So I think that like comics it's never been better to be an indie creator, but then we do have the issue of like sort of standing out in a sea of awesome. And so it's tricky, and like as a person who goes to conventions and like tries to sell my own books as well as Spencer and Locke, like it's a lot of like you're that one man band. You've got that drum, you've got the cymbals on your head. It can be tough, but at the same time, like there is no feeling quite like when a reader comes back after picking up your book and they tell you how much it meant to them. Like I've had that happen with like Spencer and Locke and my indie books, where like people will go, they'll pick it up at a con, be like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, and then they'll email me, or they'll come back like the next day and be like, this book was amazing, and like like I need to keep a box of Kleenex like at my table because like when I get because like no, when I get those, like I just want to cry. Like it's just it's like it's because in like what that tells me is that the writing that we're doing, the stories that we're telling, like it means something to people. And I think ultimately we want to be storytellers. We don't want to just be like, oh yeah, like I was the person who drew these issues of like Daredevil, because like for the people who love that, I mean, they'll love it, but like I want people to remember the work that I did as something that touched them, and not just something that was like sort of the flavor for them for that year of like a really cool, oh yeah, that was a really cool arc of Spider-Man that George drew. But like I want them to remember, but man, Spencer and Locke ripped me up inside. Like that's what I want people to remember us for being storytellers first. And I think indie comics is the place to do that.
Okay. I think bouncing off of what George just said, I mean, I think there's something to be said for picking your shots. And I think, there are some creators who, they would have had a big breakout book and then they would have thrown out 5 more books in rapid succession. But I think at least in my case, I wanted to make sure that the next books were good, and the next books kind of could stand shoulder to shoulder with Spencer and Locke. I'm not interested in making product. There are a lot of people who that's, they're at a position that they can, but I'm still getting started, and there are a lot of creators out there who will do one book and then you'll never hear from them again. And I feel like, given sort of how hard it is to break in and stay in, I want to make sure that the books that I'm doing are books that I can live with for the next 5-10 years, that I'm happy with and proud of for the next 5 to 10 years. And so I think, that's really the appeal of creator owned for me, is that, you don't have to have a book where you're like, well, I did that for the paycheck. No, like this is a book that, like, this is your statement as an artist, and your identity as, your track record, your bibliography as an artist. And that's really kind of the thing that I'm focused on the most in my career right now, is just kind of making sure that every book that's got our names on it is something that you're going to be excited to read and something you're going to be really excited to take home.
Cool. Excellent. Well said. Okay, so you had the success of Spencer and Locke Volume 1. Where and when can people get their hands on the next issue? Issue 1, Volume 2.
Volume 2 is available for pre-orders right now. You can order or pre-order Spencer and Locke 2 number 1 using the pre-order code Feb 191309 for George's main cover, or Feb 191310 for Mon House's variant, or Feb 191311 for Joe Mulvey's variant cover. So that is, any comic shop, you can tell them to pre-order it. And I stress to everybody, pre-orders make and break books like ours. We're a smaller publisher with Action Lab. Our margins are not huge. And we want to make sure that, not only that we get enough, support that we can give you guys a Volume 3, but we want to make sure that we get enough support that we actually get print copies of the book. Thankfully, our first volume, we're not in danger of that, but I've seen books that's happened to, and I don't want it to be us. So pre-order. That's the biggest favor you can do for us, and that's the best way you can guarantee us doing more stories with Spencer and Locke. But yeah, you can call up your local comic shop. It'll be out in stores in April. And it'll be another 4-issue arc. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's just Spencer and Locke. We will be telling you guys constantly what the pre-order codes are and what the deadlines are. But everyone who's listening, we really appreciate your support, because honestly, we wouldn't have come back if it wasn't for the support of all of our readers. I mean, the reaction was just overwhelming, and we're really excited to come back and give you guys some more.
And also, like a Pixar movie, we're coming for your emotions.
You will cry. You will cry. We feed off your tears, and they make us stronger. So we're very excited to tear your heart up in new and interesting ways for Volume 2.
Yeah, maybe don't use that as a tagline. Read us, we're going to break your heart. Yeah, it doesn't quite work. All right, guys, thanks very much. Thanks for spending the time with me today to talk about your fantastic book. I've got to let you know, I've read the first issue. What can I say? Reviewer's privilege, right? And if you like the first one, this one kicks off brilliantly. There's some new stuff in there, some new takes, different emotions in play. It's interesting to see where the characters are going. So by all means, if you love the first volume, get down to your local comic book shop, get this pre-ordered. And there you go. That's all from me, I guess. So one more time, thanks very much for David and George for hanging out with me.
Oh, our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
And don't forget to check the UCPN for all your favorite podcasts, including The Definitive Crusade, The Definitive Crusade 2, No Prize Podcast, and Side Scrollers. And don't forget, of course, the indie special Flipside Focus. Thanks a lot. See ya.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.